Yo, hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Yep.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. So I'll just be taking the proposition that she was nine, but I don't necessarily think that implies the conception or application within the usage of the epistemological factors of the term in itself, in which it originates from, to actually apply as a pedophile. Like, as the debate topic is, or the debate proposition being that it's basically he's a pedophile, but I don't necessarily think where the origin of that term comes from can actually apply towards the situation of her being nine. Like, sure, I can agree that she can be nine but also be married, but I don't necessarily think that implies being a pedophile. Would you like me to elaborate why?
I'd like for you to elaborate what you think the word pedophile means.
Okay, so obviously you didn't track the question I gave you. It's a yes or no conversation. Conversation. Almost said question. So, would you like me to elaborate in
Yeah, so
which
when I
the
ask you to
application?
elaborate on something else, what that means is I don't give a fuck about what you just said. I would rather you do something else. So I did answer your dumbass question. What do you think the word pedophile means?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, trying to allow Mike is not a good rhetoric tactic for you, buddy. Obviously, I can already
I
hear
don't
the
give a
vote.
fuck. Can you get back on topic?
So
We're not
guess
talking
what,
about meta
dumbass
debate.
bitch? I'm actually gonna school you real quick. Obviously,
Oh,
that's
okay.
in correlation with the fucking topic about him being a pedophile, you dumbass. Because
No,
the
it's not. Hold on.
epistemological, no, 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 no,
My
no, no, no,
rhetoric
no.
has
You're not,
nothing to
no,
do
no.
with the
You're not gonna try and
substance of
overtalk me.
whether he's
You're
not
not
a
gonna try and
pedophile or
overtalk me because
not.
that's not
You
gonna work. Your
dumbass.
stupid rhetoric tactics aren't gonna work. Okay, so I'm gonna help you out real quick.
Okay,
I'm
after
actually gonna
this, I'm
help
going to
you
ask you to
out.
explain how my
Retard.
rhetoric has anything to do with whether or not Muhammad was actually a pedophile. So you can
Okay.
ramble, and then I'm going to ask you that
Sir, I
question,
didn't
okay?
say anything about that. I didn't
Yeah, you
suggest.
did.
I'm
You
saying
did. And the
your
recording
stupid
proves it.
rhetoric
You
tactics
literally
within the
said it
debate
10
does
seconds
not
ago, but
correspond
it's okay.
to the fucking topic of him being a pedo. Okay, retard. Obviously, I said your rhetoric tactics try and use within the debate does not help you. It's not actually corresponding to the fucking topic. So it's not
Oh, so
obviously
now you just
substance. It's
contradicted
a
yourself.
tactic.
Okay,
No, it's
cool.
not a contradiction.
Yeah,
Would you
yeah,
like
you
me to
did.
explain why? No, no, no. I'm gonna explain why because the fucking meta
Okay.
point is not helping you, and you trying to derive me from that does not help you at all. Okay, so the point about it not being a contradiction is that the rhetoric tactic is something used within the debate. The fucking pedophile term in the proposition wise about the dialectic is substance used for that. The rhetoric tactic is only making you look more appealing. That's literally what
So,
rhetorical
so,
means.
so
You
if I
fucking
fart,
retard.
if I fart directly into the microphone, does that have anything to do with whether or not Muhammad was a pedophile? Just because they're both used in the debate?
Okay,
You
so
fucking dumbass. Yeah,
you're just
obviously
making
not.
my
Just because
distinction
both
more
are
clear.
in the
You're
debate
making my
doesn't mean
distinction
they're
more clear.
correlated in any
Holy
way.
shit, bro.
My
It's actually
rhetoric
funny as
has
shit.
nothing to do with
Holy
the
shit. You're
substance.
making my
Rhetoric is the
distinction
way
more
that you get
clear.
the substance
Holy
out.
shit.
It doesn't
You just
change what the
proved my
substance
own
is.
point. You just proved my point. You made the distinction, you retard. I literally made
Yeah,
the
the
distinction between
distinction because
I
they're
made the
not
distinction
related, as I
between
already
I made
said.
the distinction between substance and rhetoric tactics. You dumbass. You just accepted that fucking distinction by using the analogy. Your
Okay, a little bit
analogical
ago,
fucking
when you
deflection
started
tactic does not
talking
work.
about my
Okay,
rhetoric
retard?
tactics, you told me that it is relevant because it has to do with the substance of the debate. And I said, no, it's not. And now
That's
you're
not what
saying
I
it's
said.
not.
Holy shit. You aren't
Oh,
tracking. You
cool.
aren't tracking. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna help
I'll
you in
take
what I
your
said. No,
contradiction
no,
and then
no,
we
no,
can
no,
move
no,
on.
no. Yo, can we get a minute
I'll
on this
just,
thing? Because I'm gonna
I'll
explain
accept
what
your
I said.
concession. It's
He's
okay.
trying to strawman me badly and be bad faith and
It's
try to
on
go around
recording.
misinterpretation.
It's
Yeah, this
literally
is
on
on
the
recording.
recording.
This is on recording, by the way, because this is what I said. This is what I
This is
said.
not a
The
recording.
terminology of the word pedophile is in
Uh-huh.
reference with her being nine, because obviously the stance I took was her being nine, and I'm talking about the
Yep.
origin of the word has to deal with that, and the reason why it's going to help me
That's not what I was talking
prove the
about, but okay.
proposition distinguished by the fucking factor of the negation of the proposition. And sure, that's not what you're talking about, but that's what I'm talking about, and you claim that's what I'm talking
Oh,
about.
so now
Okay,
you're talking
that's
about something
obviously the
different from what I'm
distinction,
talking
retard.
about, so it
You
is
can't
irrelevant.
fucking track,
So it is
dumbass
irrelevant
retard. You
entirely. So it
can't
is
track.
irrelevant. Okay.
That's not even the same thing. You're talking about rhetoric text as substance versus what I said. What I
That's what
said, I
you
just
brought up.
clarified.
You
You
brought
fucking
up my
dumbass.
rhetoric
Which was the
tactics.
two propositions.
You brought that up.
No, 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 no. We ain't getting to the two
No,
propositions.
you
Was
didn't.
distinct from the rhetoric tactics and the substance which is used for the proposition. You retard. There's a distinction. One's utility for it, and the other one is for the progression of the debate. You fucking retard. Holy shit. Now we're gonna move on to the actual fucking substance
So
of the
which
debate because
one
you're a meta
was
debate. You're a
relevant?
fucking meta debater
Oh,
merchant.
okay.
Okay, we're gonna move to the actual
You
stuff.
brought up the rhetoric tactics. You're the one trying to
because
get
I
into a
said
meta
the rhetoric
debate, you
tactics are
dumbass. Why
making
the
you
fuck
look
would you bring it up if you
dumbass.
don't want to talk
I
about
brung
it?
it up because I
Then
said
don't
it's not gonna
fucking
make you
talk
look
about
dumb.
it.
And
Then
you
let's
fucking
fucking
thought
move
I meant
on
that
to
when I
your
said
prophet being a
dumbass.
pedophile.
Holy shit.
Let's
Oh
move
my god.
on to your
You said
prophet
that's
being a
gonna help you
pedophile
in
then.
application towards the
Are you ready
pedophile.
to get back
Holy
to your
shit. You didn't
esoteric
actually have
semantical
that fucking
argument on why
correlation.
technically
Holy
when my
shit, bro.
holy prophet
Holy
fucks a
shit. You're so
9-year-old,
fucking
he's not
stupid.
really a
You're so
pedophile
fucking
in the
stupid. You
way
can't
that
even
we mean
fucking
it?
track. You retarded ass bitch. You can't fucking track. You don't have the stamina
Okay.
to keep up with me. Now shut
Yeah,
the
I
fuck up and
literally
listen.
restated what you said multiple
Holy
times,
shit.
and you can track
No, you did not because
what
you're
you
not tracking
yourself
clearly.
said.
Now we're gonna
But
move
all
on
right,
to the topic instead of
all
metaphor. Okay.
right.
So why do you
Yeah, we
think?
can.
Okay,
Hey, I'm
so
just
I'm
waiting
gonna
for you,
give
dog.
you. Oh, so I'm gonna give you it and move on to the original point. Okay. We're gonna move on to the
Please
original point clearly because
do
I
it.
fucking body
Do
slammed
it.
you on the meta
Do
point.
it.
Yeah,
Do
I'm
it.
moving it.
Don't
Now
stop
shut the fuck
fucking
up.
waiting
Stop
and
trying to
stop
fucking
fucking
stall, bitch
rambling
ass
and do
nigga.
what you
Oh
say
my
you're gonna
gosh, you
do.
ugly shit. Stop trying to fucking stall. Anyways, back to the topic point.
Oh, okay.
Back to the topic point. Shut the fuck up.
Please. Please.
Now, shut the fuck up. Let me continue.
I'm waiting.
Okay? Shut the fuck up. I just
I'm
said that.
waiting.
Stop trying to cut me off. Shut the fuck up.
I,
Now, I'm going to continue.
but
So, the application in the terminology of the origin of the word pedophile relates to sexual things as well, and attraction to minors. Obviously, there could be different circumstances from sexual attraction, which is the reason why I can actually hold that it's inclusive that she could be 9 and married to the prophet, but also being exclusive towards the pedophile thing. So if I say X is inclusive, and I also have Y, which is the other proposition of being a pedophile, and I say X is inclusive to obviously the circumstances in which it actually holds, and Y is suggested to be the pedophile one, and these circumstances are clearly distinct in preserving X proposition versus Y proposition. Y proposition cannot be applied because obviously the circumstances in which it preserves X proposition is clearly going to be contradictory and not applicable. It's basically just negative Q or Q. Negative Q is clearly the application to take out Q. Therefore, negative Q is going to be the case. Now, do you have any refutation towards what I say about the pedophilia action? Would you like proof, or would you like an invalidation of the Al-Bukhari suggestion of there being sexual relations between that? Would you like that? Could you please respond and stop being a retard?
is it okay if I talk? You're gonna get like
I
rage
just said,
worthy
go ahead,
again.
fucking suggest an answer to my question,
Okay.
retard.
Well, you
Crap.
asked and then you kept rambling, so I'm just making sure you're fine and that you're not gonna kill
Go with it,
yourself.
retard. Continue.
Okay,
Fuck.
cool. Nice. So when you talk about these negations between X and Y, I'd like you to actually fill in the variables to specifically exactly what you're talking about so I don't misinterpret you. So now fill in all those variables that you just said and show me how the logic works
Yeah, I
between the
just did
actual
that.
things you're talking
So,
about.
yeah, I just showed you that. You didn't track that. So I'm going to help you, right?
Oh,
I
no,
said,
no, 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 no,
no,
no,
no,
no.
no, no,
Okay,
no,
okay.
no.
Now
Don't
I'm
even try to
interjecting.
track
Now I'm
off. You
interjecting.
fucking
So when
retard. You're
you
trying to
just
cut me off
say
because you're
when
trying to do
X
that
does
thing.
this
Holy
compared
shit.
to Y,
Holy shit.
and
I
then
didn't say
X
X does
correlating
this.
by the
Oh, holy
qualities
shit,
of
bro.
it,
I did
you
not
now
say
have
X
to
does
tell
this.
me how
Holy
that
shit, bro.
relates to
It's
this.
actually
You
bad.
can give
I did
me a
not say
logic
X does
train,
this.
but then
Holy
you have
shit.
to tell me how it
Holy
works
shit. It's
corresponding
bad
to
for this
actual
guy.
relevant
It's bad for
information
this
to the
guy.
substance of this
Holy shit.
topic.
It's bad for this guy. It's bad for this guy.
Are you
Holy shit.
retarded?
Let me help you,
Hold on,
retard.
if you're in
I
algebra, do
said,
you think you can just say
yo,
X, X,
can
and
somebody
Y,
let me
Y all the
retard?
fucking time
Okay,
and never
let me
give an
help you,
actual answer to
retard.
what X is?
Retard. Let me
Oh,
help
okay,
you.
so you have
Shut
no
the
idea
fuck
what
up
you're talking
now
about.
so I can
You're just
actually help
saying
you. I
letters.
do know what I'm
Are
talking
you
about. No,
reciting the
it's not
alphabet, you
saying
dumb fuck?
words.
Is that what
You
we're
couldn't
here to
even
do?
track what I
Do you want
said. You're
help
trying
with
to say
it?
I'm just saying words.
Well, I
You
guess
couldn't
you
even
do,
track
because
what I
your
said. You
Muhammad
couldn't even fucking
Jabari
understand what I
made
said.
fucking
Holy
scribbles on a
shit.
piece of
You're saying I'm
paper
just saying
and tried
words?
to say it
You're
was
so
God.
fucking
So I
bad.
guess you
You're
do
so
need help
fucking
with the
bad, dude.
alphabet.
You're
So you
so
need
fucking
to
bad.
fill
Okay,
in the
let me help
blanks
you,
for the
retard.
variables
Let me
that
help
you
you,
use, and
retard,
then you can
retard,
show how
retard,
the
retard,
logic
retard,
actually
retard, retard,
relates.
retard, retard,
Because
retard,
saying
retard,
that a logic
retard.
train exists doesn't prove anything about the substance of this point until you fill in that train and show how it actually applies. So go ahead, dumbass. Thank you.
Okay, so dumbass, clearly you didn't fucking track it. I'm gonna help you one more time. I'm gonna restate it
Is that the
and
only
show
thing
you
you know
what.
how to do
Yo,
is say you
so
didn't track?
retard, shut the
Okay.
fuck up. I'm gonna tell you what I
All
said
right.
because clearly you said
Okay.
X does this. I didn't say X does this. I said circumstances preserve X, which is clearly contradictory towards Y proposition, which is supposed to be the circumstances, but X is the
After you
proposition.
ramble, I'm gonna
No,
ask you to
shut the
fill in the
fuck up
blanks.
because you're
No,
trying to
I'm
get me
good.
to understand
After
it.
you're
Can
done
someone mute
rambling,
this
I'm
dude
gonna
so I
tell
can
you to
actually
fill in the blanks,
formally
and if you
fucking
can't do
understand the
that, then this
substance?
entire point
Holy
is
shit.
irrelevant. The
I'm
entire
trying
point
to
is
do that. You
irrelevant
keep
if
trying
you
to cut me
can't
off.
actually show
You're
me how
so
this
fucking bad.
applies.
You're so fucking bad. I'm trying to do
I'm
that. You
bad
cut
because
me
I
off.
want to see
You're
how this
trying to
is
run away.
relevant.
You're trying to
Okay.
run away. You're trying to run away.
I'm
I
asking
gave
you
you
directly
every
how it is relevant to what we're talking about. How is that
Okay,
running
sir,
away,
sir, sir,
dumbass?
sir, 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 sir.
Sir, sir,
You
sir,
just
sir,
ran
sir, sir, sir.
away. You just ran away from a burden. Now you're
I
placing another
did.
burden on me. Holy shit. It's
Is that
bad
that
for
proof?
this guy. For anyone
It's
watching the
bad
replay,
for this.
it's
It's
bad for this
bad
guy.
for this
He's
guy
just a
to
regular
ask
fucking trait.
what the fuck am I
Now
talking
I'm
about
gonna
in relation
justify
to the
why
actual
it's
substance
relevant.
of the debate.
I'm gonna
It's
justify
bad for him
why
to
it's
not
relevant.
take these red herrings up the ass. Oh,
So
it's so
it's not a red
bad.
herring, okay?
It
Retard.
is.
I'm
It
gonna
is
help
until
you
you
out.
prove
I'm gonna help
otherwise.
you out, okay?
I mean, it is.
So first of
Yeah, it
all,
is.
in terms of application of
Okay.
why it's relevant, because it matters towards the propositions of the debate and how we distinguish how we are going to defend these propositions and categorize them, which one serves as
It's
negation,
relevant because it
positive, and how we're
matters.
supposed to
Okay.
fulfill them, because they are useful for truth makers. Retard.
Oh.
They're distinguishing the
Notice how
factors
he's not
of
relating it back to the
pedophilia.
topic.
Like
He's
I'm
just
pretty sure I
saying
already
mumbo jumbo
fucking
esoterically on a
gave you the
general.
fucking
He
context
could
for the
literally be
fucking
talking about
conversation point.
anything right now, and
But
this
so I
entire
was basically
sentence would
just saying,
apply.
if something
He could
doesn't
be talking
hold
about
towards
anything
sexual
in the world.
application, which is the etymology of the word pedophile, where sexual application is used, attraction,
Uh-huh.
that's literally a category of that fucking thing. It's
Yeah.
literally an epistemic conditional for someone like us to actually classify someone as a pedophile, okay?
You know what that
So
means,
the
dumbass.
factor
Okay.
about this, right, is that I said if there is different circumstances, that negates there being pedophilia, and these circumstances preserve X over Y. Y is contradictory, therefore non-applicable framework, which would contradict the proposition even being conceivable under the framework of Islamic history. Retard. Now, I already gave you the elapsing part about that. I have you on local mute, by the way, just so you know, so you can't cut me off. And I'm trying to explain to you before you
Okay.
try and cut me off because you're such a bad faith debater, right? So the point in which I'm also
Saying
trying to
that.
get at, right,
Okay.
as well, with the
Yeah.
relevant point, because I already justify that. I said it's useful for
You
truth
did.
makers and etc., helping us distinguish through LEM and etc.,
Etc. Because he
and
doesn't
which
even
we use it
remember what
because
he said, by the
those
way.
are supposed to be the debate topics. Straying away from them would not help us clarify the argument. It would lead us to straying points as well. And definitely, if that's not the case, the part about my argumentation literally fails under those circumstances. So you're gonna have to
Your
try
argument
and argue
fails?
against what I just said, okay? You're gonna have to bring in Islamic knowledge instead of trying to meta debate me on the fucking things which you thought I heard, which is incorrect. Okay? Now go ahead. I'm gonna unlocal mute you. And yeah.
Okay. Nice. So, to be clear, when you talk about the circumstances regarding the word pedophile, I'm curious why you think we need to introduce Islamic history or Islamic tradition into that when we can just use our own descriptors, look at an event that happened, and describe it the way that we use the word. If I say the word pedophile means a person who is attracted to I can even say just minors in general, then it is a valid descriptor. It doesn't have to be any. We don't have to look into the background history, the fuck, what's the word? The like an etymology course for it. We can just describe the word, say how it applies, and then we see if it actually does apply. We don't have to go through etymology for that. Now, what do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the reason why it's
I'm not
application
talking.
has to be applicable towards Islamic history is the reason why because it's gonna create in some form of regressing events within Islamic interpretations, histories in which we hold, right? So say for example, if we don't actually hold towards this specific event within history, it's obviously gonna contradict these things happening. And since hadiths are recorded history of the Prophet, we're obviously gonna have to take the etymology of this word and see if it actually applies towards the Prophet's findings. Otherwise, we can't really establish him as like a pedophile if he's not attracted to her towards in that way, which would obviously imply some form of pedophilic understanding. Then obviously it's the case he ain't a pedophile, and there's other circumstances, which is the reason why I mentioned the whole preserving point, and which you're really just feeling track because I already like applied that. The whole entire logic train was basically me suggesting that these specific standards and like circumstances would negate the other because of an infinite regression within those timeline of events. If something is supposed to be the case and there's contradictions within these
I
specific
know.
numbers
I know.
of
I
a
know.
continuous formation, it's obviously gonna
Okay.
regurgitate this.
You
Obviously, gonna
said this all
contradict our
before.
history.
You're just restating shit. You said this all
Wait,
before.
wait, wait, hold on. Can I ask you a question real quick? What did I
Yep.
restate and what did I say before? Go ahead.
What did you state before? Well, what you specifically stated was how circumstances regarding X would contradict the proposition of Y. Then you finally kind of filled in the variables for X being pedophile and Y being the historical interpretations of the Islamic traditions or religion regarding actual historical events, like whether Muhammad was attracted to a 9-year-old or not. And somehow you're trying to say that describing him as a pedophile would be able to contradict anything. So you did restate that, number one. Number two, I want you can say all that, but just to be clear for everyone, all that is a claim. You're just claiming that if this, then this. But you have to prove that that's actually a valid, like, syllogism that actually follows that way. How would it be that describing Muhammad as a pedophile contradicts any historical events? Please explain that to me. And which ones would it contradict?
If you weren't like following what I said if, right? So hypothetical, right? I'm suggesting if we do accept that and there is other circumstances preserving this in which we need conditionals for something to be a pedophile, obviously the case. Also, you got the X analogy wrong. I said X was the proposition of her being 9, and if Y circumstances didn't apply, there's obviously some other version or variation of circumstances. So you completely mistracked that. The other point in which I'm suggesting is that you're asking for validism or just like some form of like proof, right? Obviously, it's the case we can't hold okay, you can't hold contradictions or regressing events within history, or otherwise the history doesn't line up, right? Yes or no? Do you grant that?
I grant that.
Okay, yeah, sure. Then that basically just validates my point. I'm saying if
No, it
that is the
doesn't.
case,
It
no,
doesn't
yes,
actually.
yes, it does. You aren't
It
listening to
doesn't.
my point. Stop
It
coming off
doesn't. I'm
so you can stop
listening.
being bad faith.
No, no, you're
You
just
aren't listening
restating
to my
everything
point.
about the infinite regression. You're just restating it. So I'm going to
You
interrupt
never
the point that you
refuted
already made because you already made it. So that's fine for me to do. I want you to show me how an infinite regression is formed in this specific circumstance. You're saying that if this, if circumstances regarding her being a 9-year-old, I guess we just change a variable, but that's fine. If these circumstances don't align with certain qualia or whatever word you just used for y, then obviously it can't be the case because it becomes an infinite regression, which leads to contradictions. And we can't have that, which I, of course, grant. But I want to see how it does become an infinite regression. I want you to take me through and actually show me how it does become an infinite regression. Not just explain how we can't have them, but show me how it would be one right here. Like with the actual, not just, oh, well, if these y things aren't applicable to the conditions or circumstances regarding x, then it would be an. Show me how those both of those conditionals for x and y do make an infinite regression. Just show me that. That's all I'm asking you to do. Just show me what you're saying is true.
Okay, sure. So I would help you check the first part. What I was also saying, like by the way, just so you know, and I was also filling the point about the varios because like you put a lot of burden just from the fucking points you made. But sure, I can actually fulfill an infinite regression because like what I was saying mostly, and then I'm not even gonna make like a fallacy claim or anything. I'm just gonna fulfill the burden so we can fucking progress because like I'm not gonna fucking meta debate this
Yeah,
shit.
please go ahead,
Yeah,
progress.
yeah, yeah. I'm doing that. So
Oh,
I'm gonna give the
please.
argument.
Yes,
I'm
like
giving
now.
the argument.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
giving the
I'd like it
argument.
now. Thank you.
I'm giving the argument.
Give you an argument. You haven't proven anything you said.
Yeah,
Why
I'm
would I
giving the
move
argument. I
on?
said I am giving the argument. I did not give an argument. I said I'm
Oh,
giving an argument. So if you actually
go ahead.
listen to pay attention to what I said, maybe you weren't so retarded. Maybe you would have like succeeded at school. You know?
Okay. So how's that relevant to the question
Give me
that
a
I asked
second.
you?
I can't send it on my current account because this is an alt. I'm gonna go on my main account, which has
What the
Nitro, and I'm
fuck?
gonna send it from there. Okay? I'm gonna rejoin
Okay.
on this alt after I send it. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, this is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a shameful day when he has to get esoteric on semantics and try to ramble on for 5 minutes just to make it seem like the prophet isn't a pedophile. It's so hilarious because how do you how do you grant, like, you could try and be extremely scummy and say, yeah, he might have married the 9-year-old, but he's not really a pedophile. like, can you prove to me that he actually had sexual attraction to his wedding partner, or was he just doing that for a show? He might have just been, flaunting that he was able to pull 9-year-old bitches. Like, what? What's going on, bro?
Blue said that's every day for him. You're so fucking Blue.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, but this is kind of a good, like when
Oh,
when
hello,
people do
Savage.
that. What?
No, not you. I was talking to Savage. Anyways, you can continue.
Yeah, well, like it's just like if someone's doing all that, like you can hear it in his voice. Like he's like losing breath going through these sentences. He's putting a lot of effort into making it as esoteric and semantic and like honestly confusing. It is. He's saying a lot of shit back and forth, going to he's not being like clear and concise at all, which he wants to talk about rhetoric a lot, but he's intentionally making it hard to track what he's saying.
Yeah,
Just so
I
that
think it happens with a lot of debaters as well. They gatekeep you. They gatekeep you from understanding them. Like I think I also told Swampy this a lot. Actually, I told him you don't need to talk for like literally 8 minutes straight if you want to make a point. You don't have to talk for 18 minutes, like 8 minutes straight. Right? You could make a point as quickly as concisely as possible in like 2 minutes. They take not even 2 minutes. Like some people
obviously,
a minute and 30 seconds. 30
yeah,
seconds. I
like
think a lot
yeah,
of the
like
times that if you talk a lot, right? If you talk, you're not you're just gatekeeping from like them understanding you, because sometimes you
it,
say so many words that like somebody can even track the conversation, as you've already said. Oh my god, you already said a lot of things. Oh, Savage said jargon expert. You're so annoying. He's gonna get you. I'm not going to say. I'm not going to defend you this time, Savage. So yeah, I
he
think
just
it's
said,
yeah. He sent a set of premises, I guess. So he should be here in a bit. Sent a set of some set. Yeah, okay. Swampy's back.
Okay, so is there any type of like refutation towards what I just posted inside the chat? So if you want, I can actually say it inside a concise manner for you inside the VC. So
no,
I
you
can
can like
mention.
explain what you just sent. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is a
sure, sure,
VC
sure, sure,
debate.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. So go on mute real quick, so I know you're not gonna cut me off and be bad faith again.
I'm
Just
okay,
go.
but you can explain it.
Yeah. Go on mute. I'm already doing that.
No,
So
I'm okay, but you can go ahead and explain it, and I'll listen.
yeah, sure. So, Magma, can you do me a favor? Make sure if this dude tries to cut me off, I can continue explaining, okay? Like, just mute him, just so it's all in fairness. Because, like, this entire debate has just been cutting off, and just arguing. I want a good faith linear debate for my, like, final debate,
Okay.
because, like, it's just fucking trash.
Oh,
So,
okay,
anyways,
good.
I'm going to go on
Okay.
with what I said. So,
Okay. So
basically,
as
the argument... Yeah,
as,
hold on.
as you explain, as you explain this, I'm not going. He's not going to interrupt you. I'm going to have it on me.
Okay, so,
Well, you're fucking interrupting him. Shut up. All right, girl, you're
Shut the
good.
fuck
You can continue.
Okay, yeah.
Bro, I'm
So
on
I'm
your
gonna go
side.
on.
Just fuck. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I know. I was talking to my dog. Sorry, he's barking to the background.
Oh, I
Let me
thought
go
that was
plug in
you.
my
My
phone
bad.
elsewhere. It's like, fuck. Everybody's on my fucking ass today.
What? All right.
Can you hear me with the fan into the background?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So basically, what this argument is just implying in general is that because there's also some standards in which there's contradictory principles within Islam which suggest that there's zina, right? Zina is just the act of acting lustfully, and the Prophet is viewed as a morally virtuous being, which is good and etc. Right? So if it's a sin to do a obviously immoral thing, which would include zina, which is lustfulness, and if he's a morally virtuous being, analytically speaking, is just someone who's morally correct, morally good, and etc. And if he were to do this, this would violate that said essence of him being morally good, and etc. So we can't exactly have that if he's supposed to be a morally virtuous being. Therefore, making that a contradictory framing to assert. Therefore, there shouldn't be no attraction to minors in that way, sexually speaking, as well, because that would contradict and violate Islam. We can't apply that to Islamic history because it's contradictory. Is there any refutation towards what I just said for the
There's a couple
understanding of
actually.
wait,
Are you ready?
wait.
No.
I'm not
No,
gonna,
you
hold
just
on,
asked me a question.
No,
Now it's
I need
my
to
turn.
clarify real
because
need to
no, you
clarify
don't
with
need to
you.
clarify shit.
Yes,
You
I
just ask me
do.
a
Yes, I
question.
do. Shut
No,
the
you
fuck up.
don't. If you ask me a question, you don't get to
Magma.
clarify after and steamroll. That's
You
not
know,
how
go
this
ahead.
works.
Go ahead.
That's not how this
Go ahead.
works.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you. Okay. So I finally we got a clear and concise answer. What you're saying is if we presuppose, you didn't say that word, but that's what the logic entails. If we presuppose that the prophet, blessing be upon his dead, rotting body, is actually morally virtuous, then he wouldn't be attracted to he wouldn't be attracted to children and be a pedophile because that's contradictory to someone with a morally virtuous nature. I can see in premise 4 you say, since the argument clearly doesn't follow that he's a pedophile, and him being a pedophile contradicts Islamic law. Here's the problem. You're presupposing that Islam is absolutely correct. This is the main problem with all of this. You're presupposing that via Islamic religious standard, that the Prophet Muhammad was a holy prophet, was morally virtuous, and wouldn't do anything like this. I don't know why you would make that presupposition, but if you want to say if he's morally virtuous, then he wouldn't be a pedophile, you would have to prove that he was morally virtuous. I don't have that standard because I can just use induction and base it off everyone in the world who we would probably agree on some level does some level of immoral virtuous actions. Since you're religious, you would have to subscribe to that because Allah is, the one true way. You can't do it yourself. So why is he morally virtuous, and why are you thinking that he is?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll just answer this real quick and debunk the burden you placed upon me, which is just some form of more realist stance which you took, because obviously implicating it's the truth. There's moral laws which would have to be abided, of course, within the metaphysical thesis suggested, but mainly suggesting this is in the framework and applicability towards the hadith, because the hadith is recorded history, and obviously the hadith in itself suggests that this is the case, and it has to align with Islamic law, or else it's a weak hadith and contradictory towards Islam. So what I'm saying is that Islam as a social structure cannot have that. I'm not necessarily suggesting that there is going to be truth within Islam, but what I am saying is that the hadith in itself makes the assertion, and obviously going based upon that, we would take this to be a, say for example, as your stance, someone with your stance would take someone who's pedophilic from the hadith. So we are accurately displaying upon the hadith in itself. I don't have to prove Islam is true, just to debunk something within a hadith. And more solely speaking, if it doesn't align with Islam, it's not even a hadith which connects towards Islam in itself. It has to go with the framework of Islam in itself to actually be accepted as Islamic or principled with the Prophet in general, because it's a hadith. The hadith has to underscribe and prescribe under some as Islamic because it has to align with Islam in itself. If that's the case, then it's not a hadith. It's conceptually distinct, and virtually speaking would be virtually distinct, logically distinct from it. We cannot apply that if it's logically distinct. It doesn't follow the same place. So as a social structure speaking, there's obviously contradictions within that, and the hadith in itself is supposed to be reflective of that said social structure because it's recorded history, and which is teach within Islam because of the Prophet's teachings. But if that's not the case, it is not aligned. It's a weak hadith, contradictory, and it is not prescribed under Islamic laws. So as a hadith, I'm going to re-clarify my point real quick, just so we're tracking understanding better, to be good faith, not call any strawmans or anything. It has to align under Islamic basis because it's a hadith. It does not matter about truth or correspondence to reality for virtuous being. I'm saying under the framework of Islam, we view him as a virtuous being because it's generally applying towards the hadith. Now, is there any refutation towards that, or some form of actual refutation which can provide why we would have to take this to be the case externally towards the hadith?
Yes. So, firstly, I'm not saying you must, for certain, take anything to be the case. That is not how epistemology works. It's not how logic works. It's not how reality works. You can't know anything for certain. All this is on a probability basis. The problem is, I understand what you're saying, is that a hadith, the goal that it has is to be aligned with Islamic law. You don't have to say that Islam is true, just to say that the hadith and its purpose is to be aligned with that Islamic law. Here's the problem. If Islamic law, hypothetically, is wrong, which you don't have to disagree with, because as you said, that's not your burden to say that it's true or false. if Islamic law is wrong, and within the hadith we have descriptions, historical descriptions, things that actually happen, factual events. We have prescriptions like law, what you should or shouldn't do. It can just be the case that the hadith is wrong on the prescriptions, the Islamic law, and right on the descriptions, the factual events that actually happened. Now, if that is the case, then the contradiction isn't an infinite regression. All that it is some people that were within that time believed that these laws were actually true. Now, they were wrong. Why? We can talk about that if you want, but the historical things that were happening around them, they weren't wrong about. That's not a contradiction. That's how humans work. We get things wrong and we get things right. Sometimes, hopefully. That's not an epistemic, logical contradiction. I agree. I hope that I've stated your proposition clearly, but just because that there's a contradiction there, that the prophet did something immoral compared to the Islamic law, doesn't mean anything. It can still be a historical document recording historical things, but not be a valid hadith under Islamic foundations. Islamic foundations is not something that I have to uphold to. It's not something that you have to uphold to if you were to deconvert. So what's your response?
Yeah, so my response is going to be like, I'm just going to cover some of the main things you said, specifically speaking about like this historical event, right? So obviously, I don't know if I'm going to be pronouncing this right, so I'll text inside the chat when I get to that point. But about your point about epistemology relating towards the JTB model, we literally need knowledge as a pillar of Islam, not Islam, sorry, epistemology. Sorry, I'm getting confused. But yeah, it relates towards epistemology and the epistemological pillars in which we need for the JTP model, which would just be a justified true belief, because I actually have an actual corresponding basis or an epistemological basis for my foundation under Islam, speaking ways. Like also the type of contradiction which I'm talking about, obviously, what I mentioned infinite regression within the process of events towards, the Islamic standard, etc. That would obviously be in contradiction in the terms, obviously can't be the case. It's always going to be false. In that case, can't be conceivable in that case. And that standard towards the infinite regression point. So the point I'm making about the specific hadith one would just be a performative contradiction. A performative contradiction would just basically be something which, analytically speaking, when using semantics, the metalogic doesn't add up. The metalogic being the statement in itself being applied to, or the terms in itself don't apply to. The semantics just an oxymoron. Obviously it doesn't add up. That's a performative contradiction. It's literally stated analytically speaking. Another point I'm gonna accord to is that if you're gonna state that this could be a real historical event, because the only actual historical event in which we actually have, which is recording this, obviously speaking, a good refutation would just be that it's a singular hadith which comes within a full volume chain. If that's the case, it's the only actual thing which describes a historical event. There's no other fucking records. If you could provide another record which suggests that, I could say, oh hey, this maybe, could be a real documented historical event. If there's only one thing suggesting that, that just lowers the probability for it actually being a real historical event, because I would say consensus from multiple people is better than just one, because obviously, one, the hadith already contradicts itself, making it unreliable in terms of the performative contradiction, and two, speaking wise about that the infinite regression point, the infinite regression point, obviously, in the standards of Islam, would be an infinite regression, so that already affirms my point about it being an infinite regression under the application of Islam. So you saying it's wrong under the interpretation of the historical basis? Yeah, I'm gonna need you to provide more sufficient evidence and basis for why we should take it to be an actual historical event, which would affirm your hypothetical to actually be preservative actually of that framework and applicability towards timelines and etc. and which adds up. Okay, so I'm gonna need that for your actual assumption, actual conclusion to actually form right. Okay, and yeah, that's all I'm gonna have to say in towards refutation.
Yeah, so obviously if you want, we can get into the historical shit. That's going to be a little bit different from the semantical, philosophical applications of this. So I'm just going to hit this, because we've been on this philosophical point, I'm going to hit this and not have to shotgun over, not that you're shotgunning me, but shotgun over to a whole completely different sect of the way that we do things, logically speaking. when you describe a performative contradiction and looking at the factual or these, conditionals or qualia that add up analytically and saying that, oh, we have a contradiction here under the foundations of Islam, you're right. We do have a contradiction. The problem is what you're describing is used in syllogisms, is used in logic. That's to say that P1, P2, C1. If P1 and P2 cannot produce C1, they have qualia that contradict each other being true, then C1 would be invalid. That is completely accurate. However, when we talk about real world people being able to be contradictory to themselves, that is not a syllogism. That is them being right and wrong in certain different areas. These two things don't have to correlate to perform some C1. Now, for you it does. Because if C1 is the Islamic foundations, or the Islamic law, or however you'd like to describe it, then P1 and P2 would have to be accurate. P1 would have to be the Holy Prophet is not sexually attracted to children. And P2 would have to be, well, actually, that's two different ones. P1 would have to be the Holy Prophet is morally virtuous. P2 would have to be he's not sexually attracted to children. There's other formulations of the argument. Obviously, you can throw some more conclusions in there as you did. But when we now start to entangle historical interpretations into this, it doesn't have to be that way. Now we can get to the what is actually true historically, but I'm just talking about the philosophical applications right now. It is not a logical contradiction to point out that the Islamic foundation can be false and the historical application can be true. That is not a that is not a logical contradiction. That is not paradoxical. That is not impossible. It is you would agree because you're not a Christian. You don't think Jesus really rose from the dead. You don't think he's really God, but you would probably agree with some other things because in the Quran, there are things that it says about Jesus. There are things that it says about Genesis and about these things that it holds to be true while not holding other things. It believes Jesus was a real person. The Bible also agrees he was a real person, but the Quran thinks he was just a prophet. Christianity or the Bible thinks he was actually the Son of God. So obviously, we can have these contradictions while some historical facts can be true, while prescriptive facts can be false. Now, just because you did me the favor, I'm going to state this clearly. You're saying under Islamic foundations, this must be a contradiction. I agree. The problem is, that's not a burden I have to fulfill. I don't have to make it aligned with Islamic foundations. Islamic foundations being contradicted is not a paradox. That just makes them wrong. Now, if you want to get into whether they are actually contradicted and look at the historical evidence, we could certainly do that. But stop holding to the standard of Islamic foundation when that's not a standard that I have. I never said, according to Islamic law, he was a pedophile. I just said he was a pedophile. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to respond real quick. If you actually listen to the points I made, I said that practically speaking, the hadith is the only known record of the fucking marriage that suggests she was 9, because there's also other historical evidence pieces which just contradicts that as a whole. But also, if you were listening to that, I made the distinction of the Islamic point and the historical point because I asked you for the evidence of the historical point as well. I agree, I did ask you for evidence of that. The Islamic point, I never said you had to hold to that. I'm talking about the known in application towards the hadith. That is the historical one in which we go off, basically suggesting within Islam, because hadiths have to align with Islam, right? If your basis goes upon Islam, obviously you already made the distinction between historical things. Hadiths are historical records of Islamic events, right? These things are descriptive things, as like already fucking implied through the entire thing, right? Obviously speaking, if they're historical documented events which are supposed to correspond towards reality about events through the religion, etc., which stands in accordance with interpreting the Quran as well, and etc., that would obviously also have to form some type of interpretation which can align with reality, right? If it's in accordance with history. That is what I'm talking about. You're talking about historical events and historical documentations. I've already stated hadiths are historical documentations and must correspond towards the reality. Obviously speaking, because if this is the only known record, as I've literally stated, and there are multiple other sources which suggest otherwise, it is not historically accurate and therefore creates an infinite regression in that point, right? I've already stated the distinction between the infinite regression point and the Islamic point as well. I'm not talking about upholding the standards of Islam anymore. I'm talking about the standards of the Hadith. The Hadith is meant to be historically accurate towards the principles and what we know, because they're the only historical records in which we have to actually factually interpret the events, right, of these specific timings, unless there's also separate accounts which you could pull, right? But generally speaking, that's how we interpret these events which happen within Mecca, this and that. Say, for example, like there's battles Aisha was involved in, and these are the things about her life and etc. She's also a narrator for some of the hadiths. She's literally speaking in the fact about in accordance with history. The Islamic point stands that hadiths have to align with Islamic principles as well, right? That's the case. It's contrary towards Islam. If the hadiths are contradictory towards historical points, they do not add up within actual correspondence of our knowledge about history and what we actually have to also backtrack to this point in time and pinpoint this. If you were tracking right, you would understand that point, and which I meant, which preserves the point in which I literally said. That's literally the applicable framework speaking. Also, about your point about PREM, that's literally the factor for about the contradictions pointing out and making the syllogism false. Obviously, you literally meant for a burden for him provided. Yeah, the argumentation also suggests like a debunking towards the Islamic thing. Obviously, I already granted that under the Islamic standards from previous to what I said. So obviously, I don't know why you're pointing that out. Obviously, that would have to uphold the Islamic standards. I also made another point, which is in which refutation towards what you said about the historical point, which was in the accordance about that point, about the historical lineup, obviously speaking, right? And mainly speaking, the virtuous point is upheld within Islam. Talking about P1 is already accepted and granted Islam. You already made that point. So if you're going to try and put a burden while also ignoring the fact that it's supposed to be aligning with the Islamic principles, and the first explanation is also explaining that, then you've already literally admitted yourself to being intellectually dishonest, not even tracking what the fuck you're saying because you're a dumbass. And now moving back to the PREM stuff about the syllogistic factors and what the performative contradiction is. There's just specific conditionals. You can have conditionals which supposed to be doesn't necessarily have to actually apply towards syllogisms or how we know. Like say for example, there's epistemic conditionals, there's causal conditionals, there's several distinct things. There's also biconditionals, which would cause something to be both true at the same time, right? Say for example, like I'm not even gonna give an example, but I'm pretty sure you already know what the fuck that is. There's several conditionals which can have performative contradictions because there are still semantics and which is supposed to be conveying actual formative fucking statements, etc., conveyances of truth and etc. These are still considered semantics, but in the semantics in which was discussed, the oxymoron part, that is lexical. There's distinct categories of semantics. So when we talk about semantics, specifically speaking within performative contradictions, that can refer to several different conditionals and the conveyances. Syllogisms are only one form of conveyance. If that is the case, it's only one form. There could also be other forms in which PREM is actually applicable towards spotting, because that's literally performative contradictions and how they work. So I don't think you understand the points you're making, Mr. I know epistemology. Let's get down to the philosophical, gritty, right? So now that I've said what I had to say, I want you to do this for me. It's just to make sure we're tracking right. For the good faith purpose of this debate, I want you to repeat my proposition and the substance I gave, which is a refutation towards what you said. I want you to try and track everything in which I just said. I want you to do that for me to make sure, you're not trying to be bad faith. I want you to realize what I'm saying. I want you to track what I'm saying. I want you to be a good faith debater, and I want you to acknowledge these things. So, in accordance to actually knowing that, I want you to simply
I know what you fucking want, you child. I know. Shut the fuck up! Damn! Now, knowing what you want, I'm not doing any of that! I don't give a fuck what you want! You rambled for 7 fucking minutes on different points. You think I'm gonna restate all of that shit? For everyone listening to this recording, if you are Muslim, this is not how you do debates. This is intellectually dishonest to ask me to restate all the substance that you just said in the proposition, which there was not one proposition. You can't track what you even say. How do you think I'm going to do that? You said multiple propositions on multiple different points. So here's the problem. 1, for the very first point you said, talking about my refutation regarding Islamic traditions or foundations or whatever the fuck. I know that you're not putting that. So I never said there are no propositions. Girl just typed that in the chat
That's
for everyone
literally on
listening.
recording too, by the
I,
way. That's on
yeah,
recording.
I know. I've referenced the recording like I just did. I never said that. Never ever said that. I did say there are multiple propositions that you said. I said that you said, can I repeat the one proposition you said? Never said there were no propositions. I don't know why you'd say that. So going on to the first point about the hadiths in the Islamic jurisdiction or whatever, or the foundations or whatever. Here's the problem. When you say, hey, there's a contradiction here between what the hadiths say, well, what you say that they say, what these historical descriptions in the Islamic foundations, what the hadiths are trying to do, this is just me restating you, what the hadiths are trying to do are align with these Islamic foundations. If it is the case that these hadiths are describing historical events within the Islamic religion, they must correspond to the Islamic foundation or the Islamic law. You're a fucking retard. And I really hope that you honestly know that, but you're just not displaying it, or you're just not saying it. If you have events that happen that are supposed to correspond to, for example, I will give an example because you fucking can't. Let's say Jesus. I think that Jesus was an actual person. I think that he walked around on earth. Let's just grant that for the hypothetical. Jesus being a real person, but Christianity being false, doesn't mean Jesus wasn't a real person just because it's a part of Christian tradition or it has something to do with Christian religion. You can have events that a religion expounds upon, but the religion gets the interpretation of those events wrong. That doesn't mean the events never happened. That doesn't mean that there's an infinite regression. It just doesn't. For example, in Egyptian mythology, they thought the Nile River was flowing because a god was giving them the ability to grow crops. Are you going to negate the existence of the Nile fucking river? No. Just because they interpreted that was happening because of an event they saw doesn't negate the event. Now, this is how you actually debate, by the way. Bringing it back to the substance. Just because the Islamic tradition or these Islamic doctrines or books describe your prophet being a pedophile and then also say, but God is, but Muhammad is morally virtuous. It can take events that happen and expand upon them in a wrong way. Just because it says he's morally virtuous and it says this thing, and I'm holding that this one part is true, him being a pedophile, this other part isn't true, the whole Islamic tradition shit. There is no contradiction there. I don't have to hold both to be true in order to have one be true. They aren't mutually inclusive. They don't have to be both simultaneously existing. That's retarded. Now moving on to the performative contradictions. You're right. We could use performative contradictions in a lot of different ways depending on the conditionals. The problem is, depending on the way that you use a performative contradiction, it doesn't lead to an infinite regression. That's what you're trying to do. You must hold to a certain type of performative contradiction that has certain types of conditionals that makes it a infinite regression. or a paradox or a logical contradiction for this to be a contradiction worth giving a fuck about. If we describe a contradiction within a person that which psychologically is called cognitive dissonance, it actually fucking exists. Yes, you're right. That is a contradiction, but it doesn't lead to an infinite regression. It depends on the type that you're using. That's why I'm differentiating my asshole, because it depends on which one you're using. If you're using one that would apply to a syllogism, analytically, which is the word he used, logically, then that's going to produce a different type of contradiction that isn't applied right here. It could be the case that to actually concisely tell you the proposition for this point, it could be the case that the foundations of the Islamic faith are false, but the historical events that it says are true and did happen, and that simultaneous coexistence is completely fine. The only contradiction that arises is the person that said those things, or the people that said those things, weren't entirely correct about the way the world works. That's all. So, just to be clear, I understand what you're saying about the foundations. I understand what you're saying about the hadith trying to align with it, but it is plausible, possible, and it is acceptable that the hadith can fail. This is what I'd really... No, you can ignore me. This is what I'd like for you to do. If you actually want to get into the substance, it doesn't matter about good faith. If we really want to get into whether your man was a pedophile, I want you to answer for me. Does it really matter if the hadith doesn't fulfill its mission 100%? Does that mean that the historical descriptions it lays out are wrong because it gets interpretations, mythological interpretations of those events wrong? Is that true? And why is that true? And how the fuck could that be true? Go ahead.
Sure. So I was laughing, just so you know, the entire fucking time. But
Go
I'll
fuck.
let you.
Continue.
I'm responding.
I don't give a
Responding.
fuck.
Shut up now. Shut up now. I'm responding. So
No, you're not.
to actually
But,
help
you know,
you, about like the whole entire point you mentioned about the
please, I
Islamic
need help.
point, you're just repeating yourself about the Islamic foundation point, because I've already mentioned the things for
You don't
hadith to
understand.
be valid, right? Because I mentioned the two distinct things which would apply in actual terms of, I could actually just say really distinct here, like real distinctions, because essentially if we do grant that the way the world works within our worldview are totally distinct, say for example the Islamic view, right, does not actually hold to the real world, it's not a correct theory of truth, right, and the other one, which would obviously be the, say for example, the fucking worldview of my fucking ass crack, right? And if it's not totally correspondent, hadiths, as laid out, have to be correspondent to actual history in which way we view the Middle East and etc. Because the battles take place and they cover
I'm
history
sorry,
of the
can
Middle
you
East.
say
So what
this more
happened?
concisely? You're jumping to different points. Can you just make this
That's
one
not jumping
continuous
to
thing?
different points. It's a
You
singular
are.
argumentation.
Oh
Could you
my
justify how I
god.
am? Can you justify how I am? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can actually. You're
Go ahead. Go
describing
ahead.
the worldview. You're making a decision between the worldview of Islam and then the worldview of the ass crack, and then you made absolutely no correlation to what the Hadith is doing. You just jumped straight to that point. Can you
Okay,
actually make
so
this one
that's
concise
cut me off
thing?
instead of me allowing for I actually finish the argumentation, because you're going off a
No,
singular
you're
strong
not.
point of the.
You're
No, no, no,
okay.
no. You're not gonna cut me off. Magma, can we get a mute on him
I
so I
just
can actually
did.
finish my point? Can we finish my? Can I finish my point?
Just to be clear, I'll
So,
mute myself if he actually makes this concise. I will, but if he's gonna
okay,
ramble and
sure.
say
Then
nothing
shut the fuck
over and
up.
over again, I
Shut the
think
fuck.
I will interrupt. Don't fucking tell me to
Okay.
interrupt or not
Shut
when you're
the fuck
not
up,
getting to the
dumbass bitch,
point.
hoe ass
You
bitch. Oh
can't
my
get
god,
to
you
substance for
ugly
your
shit,
fucking
dumbass.
life.
Oh my
Oh
gosh, you
my
ain't gonna do shit.
god.
Shut the
Is this
fuck
why
up.
you believe in Islam?
Exactly. Shut up. Boy, you getting drowned
Oh
out.
my
You getting drowned out,
god.
bitch.
Peace be upon
Anyways.
you. Fuck the prophet.
Now,
Jesus.
I'm gonna start real quick. I'm gonna start my point instead of cut me off because you're a bad thief.
Yeah,
Fuck.
let's start and
Okay?
finish it. Let's not move on to different ones. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Then shut
Go
up,
ahead.
bitch. Damn.
I'm
Fuck.
waiting.
So,
Fuck.
shut up. Anyways, the point about what I said was about the worldview and etc. Right? Obviously speaking, the hadiths have. I already laid out the fucking conditions for the hadith to even be valid, right? And I made the distinction between the Islamic worldview and the view about the ass crack. My ass crack, it fucking shits out shit. Literally speaks that way. Essentially speaking, if these theories of truth aren't correct, right? The hadith is conjuncting towards the argumentation, make it a not simultaneous, because that would imply two distinct fucking things existing. It's making a singular argumentation. Singularly speaking, towards the argumentation in itself and its reflexiveness. Basically, the hadiths have to also align with accurate historical events about the Middle East in general, because these are things described within the hadith, actual historical events. It's not just Islamic laws, because I should actually give you something right now, because what I've been saying, Islamic law would have to accept this hadith, right, if it actually aligns with Islamic law. It's not talking about the worldview, it's talking about the Islamic laws in which we obey in religion, right? The worldview.
That's worldview.
No, that's not a worldview. Let me finish. The Islamic laws in which a Muslim is supposed to follow, if it's actually halal or not, if it's actually, say for example, authentic. That's how authentic hadith is classified. Not, say for example, in which the way the world works in terms of this. It's supposed to be what we accept based upon core beliefs. Not exactly the worldview in which we correlate towards our beliefs, right? Those are obviously distinct. Okay, so now I'm going to continue. I'm going to make a continuous point, okay? Because I'm pretty sure you just said, oh, and got that point.
Well, now it's not a continuous point anymore, right? Because you're rambling. So continue.
No,
continue.
No,
just to make a continuous point, because you're a piece of shitty, poopy whoopy doopy. Well, now it's not one, so continue.
So I'm going to continue. I have you on local mute, by the way. I have you on local mute.
Oh, no.
Okay, because you're not going to cut me off. I'm not going to talk to a jibber-jabber box who wants to try and cut me off because he's losing this, okay? So the point is, speaking genuinely about the worldviews, I made the worldviews distinction, the conditions for
that isn't a worldview, by the way.
The Islamic law has to accept this way. It's not talking about worldviews in any way. You already talked about the foundations of Islam, and you're trying to make a point about the worldviews not actually totally adding up, right? That's literally what you're saying, summarized, okay? Yeah. And I was just thinking, because you're making an infinite regression point towards the Islamic ones and the contradictions viewed, because infinite regression would be some form of like a tautological contradiction, which therefore we can grant a through negation inference rule, would just be that, you know, it's not actually a thing viewed within here, and therefore it's not tautological and corresponds with reality.
It's that there's a contradiction between these two things, so he's not saying why the hadith has to be the one that's wrong if the contradiction arises. So everyone knows.
Fit it in some type of model, right? So speaking wise, and the other eccentric points about the Islamic law is not authentic because we don't accept it as Muslims according to our belief.
Who cares what you accept?
Right? That's distinct.
It doesn't matter if the Muslims don't accept it.
How we
it doesn't
understand
make
the
it
world
true or false.
in accordance with what happened through the fluence of time.
Oh my God.
Right? Time in itself is distinct from
well,
belief.
my gang doesn't accept it as true, so what you gonna say about
correspondence
that?
with time?
Like, I don't give a fuck.
We'd be saying it's interchangeable, but as Muslims, like throughout history, literally.
Who cares what the Muslims say?
Anyways, speaking through that entire point I just made, hadiths have to correspond to a reality, and it have to correspond to his Islamic law, and which accepts it. If we don't accept it, we don't accept it by Islamic law, and we don't complete that as a part of history. We don't accept it as a part of history. We don't accept that as a part of our history and the Prophet's events, as spoken as, right? And statistically speaking, if it's false and there's lies, right? Speaking wise, because I've already asked about the historical documents, by the way. You never provided them. You never gave me actual historical documents to go off.
Because
that which suggests corresponds to reality about pedophilic acts from the Prophet, and a way we act that way, right? Because, as already stated, the main quantifier for my argumentation would basically just be that some can consider him sexually speaking,
by the way.
Right? You never provided me that the Prophet acted this way towards a child, therefore he can't be considered through the etymology of the word pedophile, a pedophile by our standards, okay? And speaking this way, I've already held the proposition of her being 9, etc., but that doesn't make the Prophet a pedo in any way, right?
Just because he married a
We're entirely avoiding the part about evidence from historics, which would point otherwise than the hadith. Because if the hadith does not actually accurately suggest this thing, and you don't have other actual historical accounts, we can only take the hadith to be the case where it suggests this. And obviously, if it's the case, it's not even accurate, and like there's no actual probability for it actually being the case, then there's only status if there's one actual conditional for it being the case, and even then, that's like considerable, like heavily considerable. right? So the probability rate is just lowered by that, right? Because it's unreliable, statistically speaking, in that way, in accordance to reality. That's the reason why I made the in accordance to reality point, which you aren't tracking, okay? So if you could
You're
refute my
right.
point on that, I'm not done because I have another point to make. Like,
Oh my
essentially just speaking because,
god! Okay,
I'm just
continue.
gonna say about the point about the whole entire shit about the 2 points you made. Straw man,
Okay.
because one, you didn't let me finish the argumentation. That's not even a
That's not
full
a
rebuttal to
straw
the full
man!
argumentation, and I made the fucking distinction. So obviously, it's gonna be distinct because
It.
you're trying to say Islamic law aligns with actual theories of truth about
Interrupting is a straw
reality.
man, everyone. Don't be
That's
straw
not
man
necessarily
another.
saying in the terms of belief, okay? So I want you to give me historical documents and stop avoiding your fucking burden you've had this entire fucking debate, you dumbass.
The entire debate. Nice. Am I still locally muted for you?
No, you're not, so you can continue.
Okay. So, everyone, I know everyone remembers because I spent like a minute clarifying this. Hey, I said this a couple, like my last, like before the last one, I said this. Hey, we can talk about what is historically true or not, but we're talking about philosophy now, so I'd rather us get done with this point and not have to shotgun to another point because weighing historical, and especially for you who cannot keep on one category of existence to have two, oh my god, your brain would be broken in half and I would feel it in mine. So I will serve my historical burden if you want, but we would have to get off the philosophical point because this point isn't done. And if this point goes in my favor, then your whole burden isn't even proven. So it doesn't matter anyway. Okay. Here's the problem. When we talk about these hadiths and whatever, I you know what? I'm not even gonna restate. I just have one question. And then I'll forfeit all the rest of the time to you. One question: if there is a contradiction between the hadiths and the Islamic foundation, why does it have to be that? And I'm gonna clarify after this, by the way. Why does it have to be that the hadith is the one that's wrong? Now, a lot of what you said was like, according to Muslim tradition, as Muslims, we hold that if a hadith does not align with Islamic tradition, it's not a real hadith. How could it be real? How could this be holy doctrine or doctrine handed out by God if it doesn't even prescribe to Islamic foundation? Now, that is true because that's one of the major reasons why there's so many different Islamic countries in the Middle East. Big differences and descriptions between what is Islamic foundation. How do these purport to what the real hadiths are? You know, if we have the standard must align with the Islamic foundation, and we compare that to a hadith, does this hadith align with? I said in the Muslim worldview, you fucking retard. Track one sentence, please, and we'll get through this conversation holding hands. Damn. Oh, okay. So that whole thing is wrong. What isn't true is that none of these things are written down by God. Is that what you want to say? Here, I'm asking that question. I want a response to that. What is
Sure.
written by
So
God?
hadiths are written by close friends of the Prophet. That's like the most number one thing known by literally
Not.
like every
It's not.
fucking Muslim and everybody fucking who
Well, I'm not
follows
a
the fucking
Muslim.
Muslim
I'm not a
tradition.
Muslim.
If you
Am I a
think
Muslim?
no, I don't care what you think. I'm gonna
Well, then
actually
why the fuck
correct
are
you
you
a bit
bringing up
because
irrelevant shit?
this shit
All
pisses me
Muslims
off.
know this.
You
How
piss
could
me
you
off.
not?
You don't
Maybe
even know
because I'm
anything
not
about Islam.
Muslim.
You're so damn retarded. Oh, like I'm gonna actually. If God was supposed to be a human being who write down hadiths, that would make him really distinct from what we hold him as. That's a metaphysical
I didn't
contradiction.
say
We don't
that. I
hold
didn't
that.
say that.
Holy
Do you
shit.
think God?
I don't
Do you
care.
think
I'm
God
talking
can't
about what
write
you
books
and
without
fine.
being a
I don't care what
human?
you were saying
Hold on. No,
verbatim.
now
I
I
don't care
want an
what you were
answer on
saying
that one.
verbatim.
Now I
You
really
are
want an answer on that
intellectually
one. So
dishonest.
you
You are
think
trying to
that
talk about
God
facts about
must be
Islam.
a
You know
human
nothing
to
about
write
Islam. You don't
books?
know anything about Islam. You don't know anything. You are dumb. You don't know philosophy. You don't know shit.
So that was middle school rage, just so everyone knows. His puberty blockers weren't hitting in today, but it's okay. So, by the way, I'm still asking this question. What you interpreted from what I just said was if God came down as a human and written down these books, then obviously that would be very contradictory to what is a Muslim's or the Islamic law holds to be true, as in historical events. Do you think that God can't write books if he's not human? Do you think God is limited in his power on writing books if he's not a human? Is that what you got from that?
Okay, I'm gonna explain to you real quick, okay? And
No, I want you to answer that question.
no,
I don't
no,
give a fuck about what
wait.
the. Oh,
I
I don't
want to
care
be
about the
very
ramble.
respectful about this point
Answer the
because
actual
this is
question,
about Allah.
please.
This is about Allah. I want to be very respectful because this will help us answer this question. This will help us actually be more respectful on this point because look, I
I
hate
don't care
yelling
about
at you.
that shit.
I hate
Answer the
raising
fucking
at you,
question.
and I want
I
to
don't
help
don't
you
care.
understand
Yes, I
Islam.
know you don't like being a pissy
Because
bitch
right,
boy
okay.
because you have to be a
Now,
good little
ready?
Muslim for your little
When
sky
we
daddy.
talk
But
about, I'm
actually
going to
just
answer your
answer the
question
question,
about
please.
limiting his power because you're trying to imply some form of paradise, okay? I'm going to fix the question. I'm going to answer it, okay? That's what I'm trying to do because I'm going to explain it
Go
to you.
ahead.
That is my
Waiting.
answer, okay?
Waiting.
Very respectfully speaking because this point is on Allah, okay? Very respectful. I'm going to try, like, just be
Okay.
respectful.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
all I'm
I
asking,
understand.
okay?
I understand.
Okay? All I'm asking, okay?
Yeah.
Now, speaking when we talk about Allah, and say, for example, the words within the Quran. The
Yeah.
Quran, as a book, was
True.
written down through revelations. But the Quran in itself, in pure form, right, would be the speech of Allah. We consider the speech of Allah more so a subsisting property. Ask him, do you know what subsisting is? So I can ask you that question respectfully and it can help my answer more because it's a conditional, okay?
Subsisting, as in it comes from. Is that what you're trying to get at?
No, that's I don't even think it's theologically accurate. Subsisting
Theologically.
exists. No, yeah, theologically because this is about like the theology and like the existential theology. I should clarify, but a lot when we
Yeah.
talk about subsisting properties and etc. More so aligned with authoritism and etc. But mainly speaking, if it's subsisting, that means it's dependent upon itself. Essentially speaking, I don't think that implies another entity because it's a part of that said. I don't think it's dependent because it's subsisting within the essence, right? It's subsisting within the nature of God, right? So that's what we view. That's what we would view as the Quran, etc. The speech of Allah, right? The subsisting thing within his essence, his nature, the Quran, because it's also reflective of knowledge, because you can actually claim it's a Cambridge attribute, essentially speaking, via that. A Cambridge attribute would more so essentially speaking it's more so a reflective thing. So I'm not
Okay. Yeah.
saying it's a like reflective property in that sense where it's like has to be contingent upon this, but it's more so reflective about the knowledgeable nature and essence of God. So it's self-dependent within that essence of knowledge, etc., all knowing of God. It's reflective of that part. The speech and etc. becomes a form of his rational nature and inquiry, right? That is what we view as things like Allah's speech and etc. The hadith is recorded events, the distinction being between that. I don't think that limits Allah in any way. If you could actually form a contradiction, I'll try my best to refute it. And respectfully speaking, thank you for listening and not cut me off that point because that was very respectful. I respect you for that.
Okay. Like when I asked that question, it was, and I clarified it. It's a genuine question because I had said like when I said the thing about the things about these books being written down by God, and then you said obviously not because God coming down as a human being and writing down these books is completely contradictory. So if that's the worldview that you hold to, that's what happened, fine. Okay. It is subsisting from his nature. He kind of told Muhammad or whoever wrote the Quran to write these things down as he says them, passing his knowledge on to one to the other. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Let's get back on track. So here's my problem with the whole entire thing. I have one very integral question. Now I don't want to know how the philosophy behind it works or the logic. I just need this to be known. Earlier in the conversation, you had said that for your argument to go through, you do not need to hold that Islamic law or any of these sort of tenets are true. That is not a burden of proof for you, and fine, good for you. It's not one for me, and it will never be one for me. God forbid, ironically. But what I'm curious about is you talk a lot about how Muslims believe, or Muslims have this compass of sorts, that hadiths are only valid and true hadiths if they conform to Islamic law or Islamic tenets, or however you want to describe it. Why do I need to hold it that way? Why can't I just hold that these hadiths can be historically accurate, but not theologically accurate? I don't understand why you talk a lot about the way that Muslims determine which is a real hadith has anything to do with me. What you're saying, and the reason that I was saying you're putting this burden of proof on me for the Islamic jurisdiction, is because you're saying if you want to use hadith as a actual historically accurate document, you must say or explain to me how this contradiction between the Islamic jurisdiction can exist. And I'm saying to you that the Islamic jurisdiction is not a burden of proof for me. I don't have to hold to that. I can hold that that's wrong. I can hold that Muslims are wrong in their compass of how they determine which hadiths are valid. I could also hold that they're technically not wrong. I can hold that the way that Muslims determine which hadiths are valid, what they're trying to really get at is which hadiths are theologically accurate. I don't think any rational Muslim would say, yes, this hadith is invalid. It was made by, it was forged, completely forged in the medieval century. But it might have some historical truth to it. I mean, imagine if it described holy crusades done by Christians or the Catholic or the Council of Trent. If it described those things, and we had some sort of backbone to it, just saying that we could determine that is historically accurate, a well-reasoned, rational Muslim could say, yes, this hadith is not valid. This is not a real hadith. But when I say that, what I mean is it's not theologically accurate. Now, that doesn't mean that every sort of truth that could possibly exist within this book is not true. I'm just referring to theology and what it means to be a hadith. So my question for you is, why do I have to hold that if a hadith doesn't align with Islamic jurisdiction, the hadith must be wrong? Why can I not hold that the Islamic jurisdiction is the one that's wrong, and the hadith just has historical accuracies to it, not pertaining to theological accuracies?
I'm pretty sure I actually counted this point pretty well. Back when I was talking about the distinction within worldviews. But now since I calmed down a bit, I'm gonna try and engage more so less toxic, so we can actually get more so better progression. What I am saying essentially, that's the reason why I made the other conditionals as well, what we need, because firstly I made the correspondence towards actual history, and that's the reason why I also asked for the point about essentially speaking the other historical accounts, because that forms some form of consensus. I also made that part, that's the reason why that burden is essential towards that, because effectively, if I were to grant that there was more historical evidence than what Islamic law would suggest, obviously you can actually pertain to a strong argumentation if you were to go from that and defend it on that point, right? Because then there's a lot more to go off, right? But
Agree.
here's the thing. What I said is that if you can't provide anything other than this specific hadith, which is already almost accepted universally as holding some of the biggest contradictions of all time, with more so pertaining towards battles and etc. Say for example, Aisha, historically speaking, she fought within the wars and etc. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and etc., has said, or it wasn't said, but more so, it's also documented within past Islamic battles and etc. that within these wars and waged wars on other tribes and etc. that basically speaking, you had to be 15 or older to actually be fought, and this would actually have to be qualitatively scaled to this, right? So, if it is the case that there exist historical inconsistencies, I'm saying if it's the case because there could be more, historical evidence against what I'm suggesting about the battle with Aisha, but this is also another historical inconsistency with this specific hadith. which would just contradict that historical piece, right? If we were to accept that as just historical
Hold on,
Islamic
wait.
dismiss, right?
Hold on. Is it fine if I ask a clarification on that point? With the historical,
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
with the historical inconsistency you're talking about, are you referring to an inconsistency with theological prescription or other historical description stated in the same text? I kind of lost you on that point.
Not into the same text because if there's multiple contradictions, that would I'm pretty sure that would just invalidate the text as a whole. So obviously, if that negates that part, I would obviously have to go with the other part because like mainly like a big part of history is that like Aisha also fought within these battles. Like it's documented within the battles. There's other texts which suggest that it's not documented within inside the same text. And if that's the case, then that historical text in itself does have some big contradictions with the historical like consistency and timeline in which we have these battles as well, etc. Like formally speaking as well, on that topic part. So I wouldn't be referring towards the text because I obviously mentioned the other texts and documentations that would imply it's distinct from the specific text about Aisha being 9 or 6 because around the time they got married, would you like me to bring up the time where they were married? Yes or no?
Not exactly.
Okay, yeah, okay. But essentially speaking, she was involved during these battles around the time, of the marriage and etc. Right? If that's the case, and we permiss this as like a historical text, and right, and there's not other pieces of history which would contradict the battle,
Yeah,
that's why it's more so. Yeah, hold, wait. You respectfully wait, please and thank you. It's more so like if there isn't other texts which help clarify your point that this battling isn't the case, it would definitely help your argumentation. You said you agreed to that point, which I made. That's the reason why it's essential for more documentation to be in exact accordance, because obviously I said that a hadith also has to be historically aligned with what we consider as like history within this as well, because hadiths, speaking by what they are also documentations of history. And I'm just saying, as in principle towards belief, if the hadith in itself, like, in principle towards belief, that's the reason why I'm also mentioning the distinction of what I made between adhita and more so not theological creed, but more so adhita as a Muslim, etc., versus these historical texts. That's the reason why I made those distinctions in the first place, and like these things in which we hold to. So, essentially speaking, the Islamic law point, like, I'm not saying you specifically have to hold towards that. I'm saying that Islamically speaking, that would invalidate the hadith, and we don't accept that, right? So there obviously must be other historical documentations as well, right? So that is why I also mentioned the accuracy towards history in itself, right? That's kind of like one of the main big points that Ben mentioned this entire thing. So now that I've answered, I'm pretty sure we can move on to the point. Like we could just drop this point, like if that'd be good. We can move on from the philosophy point and just get into the historical nit and gritty of it.
Okay. Now, just to be clear, because when I asked about the historical inconsistencies, I guess I shouldn't have included the condition of being within the same text. Obviously, if there's different historical like contradictions between multiple texts, it's also something to take into account. But going forward, because obviously I'm not a Muslim and I don't hold this to be a valid compass of truth, if we want to move to this historical point, are we gonna determine what's true by what does it contradict historically, or does it contradict Islamic foundation historically? Because if it's the latter, the Islamic foundation, then we need to stay in philosophy. If it's the first one, does it contradict other historical texts? Then I'm glad to go to history.
Historical texts, because as I mentioned, the battles of Aisha and etc., those are historically documented. So I'm not talking about like Islamic principle. I just made that distinction to entail that we don't accept that hadith as well, because that's one of the big factors I mentioned.
Yeah, that's I understand it's a factor for you. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from, that it's not a factor for me.
I get where you're coming from. I'm just saying specifically, that entire point was just kind of us meta debating and what was saying semantically. But I do appreciate the comments at the end of that point, and I'm glad to move on as well.
Okay.
And
Okay. So historically, just to be clear, I have until 8, but I'm gonna try and pound through some of the substance. There are 3 now. I'll admit you might know more about this than me, so tell me where I'm wrong. I see 3 texts right here that describe the marriage of the messenger of Allah with Aisha or Muhammad or the Prophet. There's 3 distinct texts. There's the Sunan an-Nasiyah 3379. There's the Sahih al-Bukhari, and there's the Sahih Muslim 1422b.
So Al-Bukhari is the one where we are specifically targeting because that's essentially where the pedophile came from, and like there's multiple other ones, but specifically speaking, this is the text Bukhari, and essentially speaking, it just kind of revokes the pedophile topic within Islam as well, and historically speaking. So I'd rather, since we already moved past like the essentially speaking within Al-Bukhari as well, I'm pretty sure. I'd rather just focus on the other two instead of Al-Bukhari, because Al-Bukhari in itself, like in its events specifically speaking, because there are other texts which document Aisha and etc. There's like calculations from historical documentations and statements which suggest Aisha was not in the age in which Al-Bukhari states historically as well. So that would already kind of make some of its information incredible. So I'd rather go towards the other two and examine them and dissect them.
I understand. Tell me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure we're going by the same epistemology for historical accuracy, that we're going by the same, things that seem to make the probability of something being accurate true. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Earlier, you had said that one historical document saying something, while it is evidence, if it's the only one that says it, the probability gets lower that it's actually true. And that doesn't mean that it isn't true. It just means that this isn't as good evidence as if we had multiple sources that agreed on the same point historically. Do you agree with that statement? Hello? Am I still in the VC? Yeah. Testing. Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think he's the one who.
He
yeah, maybe.
muted. Okay.
How many hours have this been?
Not that many. Like, we started like at 6:18 or 6:15.
So an hour and.
An hour and some change. Yeah, that's how I have to go at 8. Of course, he mutes as soon as I say I gotta go. So, oh my god.
Think you can even like finish up in like maybe 5 minutes.
You want us to finish up in 5 minutes?
No, I said I think you can. I didn't say
I'm
you.
back. Wait, ARPA. Just for clarification, real quick, because like I need to know, because the scheduling. Do you have to go anywhere like specifically in this set of time? Like, do you have anywhere you have to go? Like, speaking wise,
Yes,
right now.
like at 8 it must be a hard stop for me. That's why I want to pound through this.
Okay. Wait. I got a suggestion. We can postpone the debate for now. We can do the rest of it tomorrow in the morning. Do you think you're available for that time? Like, I just want to schedule so we can continue, because like I think this got like really good at the ending part. Like, I really do want to continue this.
I don't make promises when it comes to postponing shit. I'll try
That's
for
fine.
it, but
I
it's
just
not
want to
promise.
schedule. I'll ping you too, just to make sure you're available. Like I just
Okay.
want to schedule. That's all.
Okay, but I do want to, unless you have to go like right now, because you sound like frantic. I do want to pound through this one thing, and maybe it will. Okay. Do you agree that having one document say describe one event less evidence than having multiple say the same event?
I think as a consensus, I think like through historically speaking as well, through the consensus of the people documenting this and that, I think the documentations would contradict one another, and it kind of creates inconsistency if we take this thing to be true, this and that. And
Well,
Specifically,
well, well,
yeah. Wait, wait,
well,
wait,
I
wait,
just
wait,
want to
wait, wait.
clarify. I
I'm
just want to clarify what I'm saying.
okay.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just talking about a general rule of thumb for historical investigating. If one source says one thing, and there's nothing else. One thing says one thing. That's less evidence than if multiple things said the same one thing. Do we agree?
Well, I think that would lower the probability. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I think that would give some form of like more of a higher burden to prove the consistency with that specific narrative because like I'm not entirely saying it would be like disproven as true, but I would say it's contradictory to most of the consensus. So what I mean by that is specifically saying that it's gonna make it harder for you to prove. I'm not saying that it would create a false narrative because, like as I said, it would lower the probability. So all I'm gonna say is that I wouldn't say it considers it false, but more so makes it very hard to prove. And you're gonna need to engage the other substances of the documentations and like kind of pound through those two as well. You need to
Okay.
like spot some inconsistency within that, to try and create like a framework of events. You know what I'm saying?
I understand. But obviously, if I have multiple things and we want to question the like how reliable each of them are, obviously it's gonna take more to get through that. But all I'm saying is like, the reason I'm saying this because earlier you kind of said this, like if you only have one hadith, one historical document that says one thing, the probability of that being true is less than if you had confiding, or what was the word they use, like compounding sources, other sources that aren't directly entangled within this one that say yes, this is also true. Like if I'm at home and I tell the police, hey, I was at home alone, they're gonna there's not much to go on there. I could be right, but it's less evidence than if I had two other people with me and they say I was also at home. That's all I'm saying is like, if we have multiple sources for the same thing being true, then that thing is more likely to be true because we have more evidence for it. Like, you agree with that, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's why I said. That's the reason why I also made like the burden part because like it's gonna make like one hell of a thing to prove, and obviously you're gonna have to take into account those events if you want to prove this one slightly altered, other thing because obviously it would disclude that specific thing from a set of plural things. You know what I'm saying about the plural? Multiple things. It would disclude that from that. Just adds less probability. I think it adds more historical evidence, but at the same time, I think if you can gather a consistent framework of events for the other thing, and you can clearly like disengage the other ones, I think you can raise probability. But that would also include bringing in other documents, more so different set of documents and etc. as well. So it's gonna like, as I said, be a burden to do that. That's the reason why I also made that clarification. So I would say it wouldn't necessarily be like more so more like evidence, but raises the probability for being something true. More so in the sense that like it's more assumption wise, but obviously speaking, if you could provide evidence that is false, there's more, likely options for the other case to be true. So obviously we would have to take these options and obviously kind of engage them, as I said. So
Oh,
I wouldn't
obviously,
nec-
yes, I agree. But I guess I'm just a little confused because, like you say, like I wouldn't necessarily say it's. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I just heard this 5 seconds ago. You say, well, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's more evidence, but it might raise the probability that it's true. Like, what I feel like that just means it's like more evidence. But I mean, like, all I'm asking is if hypothetically, I understand the burden and all the legwork to get there. I understand that, and I'm willing to track the journey. All right, I understand that. But if it was the case that I got you multiple things that were historically reliable, that all pointed to let's say 3 books that were historically reliable, I proved it to you, that all say my dick is 12 inches, that does make it more likely that it's true rather than one book saying, which is historically reliable, saying my dick is 12 inches. And that's just a simple question.
uh, yeah, but like, that's the reason why I said it's more so of an assumption to take it's true. That's the reason why I added assumption in that part. That was one of the key words of like my semantics there. specifically speaking, that's why I said assumption-wise. That's the reason why I also mentioned the burden. That's the reason I said engage this and that. I think it could count as evidence. Could be the keyword because does would affirm it to be the case. I'm saying it has potentiality to be the case because obviously there's room for the other, growth of the other evidence as well. That's why I'm also adding that. I'm saying it's more so of a false dichotomy than it is, more so it's just one or the other where it's like, this is exclusive. I think it's inclusive for either one to have, like, in terms of like more, like, I'm saying, like, say for example, growth for evidence is inclusive. I'm saying for the fact of there being more probability, I would say, well, yeah, that's exclusive. For evidence, I think evidence is potential. I wouldn't affirm it to be the case. That's why I think evidence is potential.
I understand what you're saying. Like, evidence is going to depend on how reliable this evidence is. If it's just some whack job fucking book that someone scribbled down on like a notepad, then that's not really evidence. But it depends on the evidence, and and these are two different sections. I respect that. But like I'm specifically referring to a hypothetical. Like, we don't have to question on whether these things are good evidence, whether they are reliable, whatever. In the scenario where I have 3 books that I prove to you are indeed historically reliable, and they all say the same thing, compared to a historically reliable book saying the same thing, would you say that these 3 books are raise the probability more than the first book? And that's just I feel like that's not a false dichotomy.
Well, if it was indeed historically, in the hypothetical, because like, I kind of feel like we switched hypotheticals there. I'm not saying you did. I'm saying it feels like a switch, kind of, but like more so in reference to the hypothetical. I think if you were to say that this is in more line, more consistent, and definitely could be the case, not could be, sorry, is the case, that it is more so historically reliable, I think indeed you could have a strong case. You would definitely have a stronger case. I
Yeah.
do say that.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why I also added that we shouldn't also discount the other evidence because, like, as I said, there could be more so other things which could preserve it. That's why I'm not discluding other variables. I'm saying that these specific variables don't have an accountance within our knowledge. So what I'm saying is that there could exist other things which align with this specific one thing which we only have in our knowledge. Think of like the books from Gravity Falls, say for an example. There's only one book of the group of like books from Gravity Falls, right? There's one book, Gravity Falls, which documents everything within Gravity Falls, right? As a map. But more so speaking, there's other things out there which is external to our knowledge. So that's why I'm saying I'm not discounting them, but I think historically reliable in that scenario, according to our knowledge of what we know about the world from then, in that specific time standard, I think, yeah, and that's the reason why I'm also including potentiality to be inclusive, because I don't think it contradicts potentiality. I'm just saying, according to that, I think it obviously would be a stronger case. You know what I'm saying?
So just to clarify, the 3 books are better than the 1. If everything is equal, if all the variables are equal and accounted for, the 3 books are better than the 1.
They're better to use, but as I said, I'm not discounting the possibility of more. So, I would
mean,
say,
I
according to
understand.
our knowledge, I would say,
According to our knowledge, if we live in a vacuum and we have 3 books that say my dick is 12 inches and 1 book that says I have a vagina, we would take the 3 books over the 1. In a vacuum, nothing else.
Well, if you have a vagina, I'm obviously tapping that, by the way. Also speaking, I
I'm
would say
not
that
returning to this VC.
that's the reason why I also said it obviously would be the case, and that's just why I also, yeah.
Okay. Well, then it seems like we agree. Obviously, I understand. Not a lot of people do this, to be honest, but I understand the caution in saying there could be more evidence. There could be 5 books instead of 3. But it seems like we agree. In a vacuum, we have 4 books. 3 say one thing. 1 contradicts those 3 books. The shits with the shits. Okay. That's just grounding for the conversation that we hopefully may or may not. Hopefully, we'll have tomorrow or
Yeah,
another time.
and Yeah, I appreciate the conversation with you, and I hold no hatred for you for your belief. Obviously, I'm just saying more so. Like, I'm sorry for getting pissed off. It's just like I hold Islam to my core very at heart, and like some of the stuff you said, I found disrespectful without realizing you didn't have that knowledge. So it is kind of my fault for presupposing you did. So my bad on that part.
For actually taking accountability. Guru in here has a new guru, and that's you. Motherfucker cannot take accountability for any fucking thing that he ever does in his whole entire life. Just one question before I go, because I have a couple minutes. Do you think this is not a gotcha? Genuine question. Do you think that it's theologically valid for the terrorists on 9/11 to do it? Is that theologically accurate?
I don't even know. I don't think that because it doesn't align with what I believe. I don't even think that because like they killed innocents. By the way, they did that on purpose to get back at the U.S., but without taking accountability for the innocent lives. So they didn't follow the Quran at all in protecting women and children because that's literally one of the laws we must follow. So I don't hold that they were moral at all in doing that. If it was actually terrorist, because like I know there's theories about America doing it, for propaganda and shit, but like I'm not accepting those at all. I'm just saying if it is the case, the Muslims did this. They were wrong in doing that. They were morally wrong.
It's just because I've heard like there's like some like Quran or Hadith verses that are like that talk about waging war against the enemies. None is
Oh
innocent
wait,
if
wait,
they don't
wait! I
accept
know what you
Allah.
mean. I know what you mean. Say for example, within the cow verse chapter 2, which is the cow verse 191. This is an example of like what happened within that specific timeline of history. So they were religiously persecuting Muslims during that time, and as a Muslim, we hold that religious persecution is more worse than death. So we fight as like martyrs. Do you know what a martyr is? Like basically, you fight for your religion. You are fighting for your religion more so. So we were acting in self-defense because they were religiously persecuting us.
And you would say the 9/11 terrorists probably warped that verse out of what it actually meant to
Yeah,
justify their
like
cause.
like the radicalist, I don't accept. I don't accept radicalists. Radicalist off my list. I'm not seeing you at dinner or anything. I'm not taking you out on a date.
Okay, based. All right, I gotta go. Appreciate the conversation.
All right then. Bye. Oof.